Will the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1 be announced next month or early May? Well, we've now got an answer for you, along with an update on which lens will be announced alongside these much anticipated cameras. But do we have any validated leak specs on the R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1? Before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. According to Canon rumors, the flagship mirrorless camera will be announced in April, alongside the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. That's just 1 month. But wait, there's more. That elusive 35mm will also be announced, although it doesn't look like it's going to be an f1.2 anymore. We've been told that Canon will announce the 35mm f1.4. It's an L series USM, and it's coming next month alongside the EOS R5 Mark II and the EOS R1. And I'm glad to hear that the announcement will be coming next month instead of making us wait until May. And I'm really happy to hear that the announcement is coming next month in April instead of having us wait until May. It's really good news, but that 35mm f1.2, it's a 1.4 now. Just a few months ago, it was a 1.2, and a few months before that, an f1.4. Canon rumors goes further, stating that the second source said it would be the 35mm and f1.4, not an f1.2. But just last December, Canon rumors told us with the CR3 that there were conflicting reports as to whether or not the 35mm would be an f1.2 or an f1.4. But now we know it'll be an f1.2. This probably doesn't seem like much of a surprise for you. For much of the past year and a half, when it comes to rumors coming out of Canon about cameras such as the EOS R5 Mark II and the EOS R1, the specs have been anything but, well, credible. They seem to be going back and forth or flip-flopping. We get some leaked specifications on the camera, and then we find out, well, don't trust this source or don't trust that source. When it comes to the 35mm, again, this thing is, we keep getting promised it's coming year after year, and that it's going to be an f1.2, and then it's going to be an f1.4, and now it's an f1.2 again, and now one source is saying it could be an f1.4. So here we are 1 month away from the announcement of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, the EOS R1, and a 35mm lens, and we don't know yet if it's going to be an f1.2 or an f1.4. And what about the EOS R5 Mark II and the EOS R1 specifications? Do we have anything valid for those two cameras? Well, just last week we were told vague specifications for the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. Do these specs look detailed enough? Do they build confidence that they're coming from a known source with inside information? I mean, we don't even know if it's a backside illuminated sensor or a stacked sensor. We know that it's going to have a new digic processor, but the name is still unknown. And 8K RAW, well, what are the frames per second? And 4K 120 frames per second. Is that oversampled? We really don't have any detailed information here. It's nice to know that Canon Log 2 is going to be there, and it has a max burst of 60 frames per second. But what about all that other stuff that we need to know? Dynamic range, ISO performance, 12-bit RAW, 14-bit RAW, 16-bit RAW, at what frame rates? It's all missing. And in January, we were told that the Canon EOS R1 would be a lower resolution than initially expected for the R1, and it won't be able to shoot 8K video, as Canon will segment this feature for the Canon EOS R5 series of cameras, the R5 and the R5C, a decision that is probably the correct one. And while these specs do look detailed, there are some rather puzzling things here. Unlimited 40 frames per second and 60 frames per second Canon RAW does look pretty positive and pretty good for continuous shooting. But then the next two lines seem a little bit strange. Up to 120 frames per second, up to 240 frames per second, boost continuous shooting mode. And these specs were only considered a CR2, and that's for a very good reason. You see, they're coming from a Weibo account, E8M, and this account is very good when it comes to providing us with information about, well, camera registrations. But as far as leaked information about camera specs, they've proven to be very unreliable. And these specs actually came from an unknown source that even E8M says, well, take it with a grain of salt. Well, that's not the wording he used, but it's a Chinese idiom that doesn't translate well to English. Sony Alpha Rumors went further, stating that the source, while accurate with camera registrations, is rarely accurate with specs, and not to believe the specs of the Canon EOS R1 because they'll be insane.
Asking my trusted sources if they got something about this camera, and one source actually gave me a feedback. So this is a trusted source, and he actually knows some of the Canon R1 specs through his channel, but he didn't feel like sharing the specs because only a few people know about it and he doesn't want to get busted or get into any troubles. But I asked him an opinion about the camera, and he's unbiased, and I know the source. He's very realistic when it comes to sharing info and details about cameras, and quote unquote he said this camera will be insane. So insanely capable, really exciting. This is what he said.
So when Sony Alpha Rumors says that the specs will be insane, I hope in a positive way, because at this point it's really hard to know much of anything that we can expect from the EOS R5 Mark II versus the Canon EOS R1. Other than the R1 will cost more than the R5, but that's really it. We don't have any valid leaked specifications, we don't have any leaked images, and we don't have any indications of any leaked pricing. And all this with the announcement supposed to be happening next month. Not early May, not late April, but now next month. That's 30 days away. It could be 6 weeks away, but we don't have anything validated. And if this is the case, we should start to get information being leaked out very soon. We should start to hear things in the days and weeks ahead. We should start to get valid information. Why? Well, because when you get to a major announcement like this, Canon will start having, discussions with distributors and retailers, major retailers, and this usually happens within 2 to 1 month before the announcement. So at this point, to be 1 month away and have nothing that's really been validated, nothing that's specific, but we're getting stuff from leaked Chinese sources that are unreliable, it just seems a little bit puzzling. And if you're tired of waiting, you can pick up the Canon EOS R3 right now. It's actually $1,500 off its release price at $44.99. And the Canon EOS R5, well, it can be had for $29.99 at B&H. And at Adorama, they go one step further, tossing in a SanDisk 128 gigabyte CF Express card Type B and a card reader. And if you do purchase either of those two cameras from Adorama or B&H or even Amazon.com, then please consider using my affiliate links. These guys right here, I do have them in the description down below, which you can copy and use. If you do use them, though, just to be transparent, I do get anywhere from 2 to 12% back, depending on where you purchase them from and what gear you get. And this really does help this channel grow. I really do appreciate all of you that have used my affiliate links in the past and continue to do so, especially the person that bought an R5 yesterday. Thank you very much. And if you do want to stay up to date on the latest and greatest regarding the Canon EOS R5, the Canon EOS R1, what lenses will be announced, and I find it surprising that we'll only get one lens announced. I think if we do get the 35mm f1.2 or f1.4, that's probably going to be paired up with the R5. I wouldn't be surprised to see something like a 200 to 500mm, a super telephoto, or some other lens in that category to be announced for the Canon EOS R1. After all, we've been hearing about the 200 to 500mm for a long time. So if you want to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and choose all notifications, and also follow me on X. All those news stories that aren't quite big enough to have their own separate video, I'm always tweeting out, and we see an awful lot of sales on right now, not just the R3, the R5, certain lenses, sales from Canon, Nikon, Panasonic, everybody's got incredible sales on right now. I think we're getting ready for a major refresh everywhere, and as I reported to you yesterday, Panasonic has also registered 2 cameras. So is it going to be a GH7, an S1R Mark II, an S1 Mark II, or an S1H Mark II, or something else? So a really interesting time coming up here. I can't wait. Apparently, we're just now a month away from the announcement of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1. Although there is one thing I find a little bit interesting. Do you also find it strange that Canon would do an announcement of the EOS R1 and the EOS R5 Mark II on the same day at the same event? These are very different cameras. I would expect the R1 to have its own separate event. After all, people have been waiting for this camera for well over 4 years. since the 1DX Mark III, since Sony announced and released the Alpha 1, and since Nikon announced and released the Z9 and then the Z8 last year. Now, if it was me, I would have a whole separate event for the R1 and then have something for the EOS R5 Mark II and separate them by a month. Maybe do the R1 next month and the R5 Mark II afterwards, but nobody consulted me. Anyhow, have yourself a great day. Spring is in the air. I just noticed the other day that the robins are back, blackbirds. It's sounding like spring, even though this morning it is really cold, like a -2, -3. It's supposed to be going up to around, well, 16, 17 degrees Celsius. So yeah, I might even go outside dressed like this. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, follow me on X, and we'll see you again soon.